Ladies and gentlemen, Family Plot would like to dedicate this episode of the show to Justin Julian, our longtime producer, as one of the greatest Jack the Rippers the Beast Haunted House ever had. I'm Dean, I'm the dad.
I'm Laura, I'm the mom.
And I'm Krysta, and I'm the daughter.
And together we are Family Plot. Very nice, that works. Let's get the housekeeping out of the way. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. First of all, if you want to help us out, a couple of ways you can do that. First is with Patreon. There's only 2 levels right now, $1, $3. Every little bit helps. If you get some cool stuff for signing up, it's a monthly thing. And you can pause it if you need to. If you can't do a monthly donation, you can always throw us a few bucks through Buy Me a Coffee. That's a one-time thing. Most importantly, if you enjoy the show, share it on social media.
Share it with friends.
Share it with family.
Share it with everyone. And if you don't enjoy the show, please
keep it
to yourself.
Wow.
That was bad.
That was so bad.
We can be off sometimes. Like I said, we got a lot to talk about. So we're sort of pushing through the opening here. What are we talking about?
I still don't know why you don't have the opening pre-recorded. I feel like we could we say just about the exact same thing why don't you just why don't we have a pre-recorded opening and exit, and then we just talk about the show every week and you just dump them in?
That would take so much less time.
Okay. I like that we're real and that we just come out and do our thing and we can get
boss.
Well, I mean, boop beep boop boop. I want to be a bot. That sounds like fun. She told me no.
Let's move on with the show because, like I said, we got a lot
to cover. Sure, absolutely.
We're going to go back to 1888 in Whitechapel, the East End section of London, where conditions were poor. There was almost no housing, there was very little work, and fresh food was hard to come by. Crime and prostitution were rampant in the district. It is under these conditions that a series of at least 5 murders, possibly more, occurred that horrified and enthralled the residents of London, and to this day form part of the cultural backdrop that is modern London. Tonight, in our final spooky season episode, we go historical true crime as we discuss Jack the Ripper. But first, it's time to catch up with our Krysta.
It's not just any corner, it's Krysta's Corner.
Hello everyone, how's it going?
It's good.
Keep going.
So what's going on in Krysta's little world today?
Well, there's been a lot going on recently.
Yeah, I know you have another tournament Friday.
I have another tournament Friday. I don't know if we're going to sign up for another one after this. We have done all of
the required
tournaments. After this one, we have done all the required tournaments.
I loved tournaments, but I really loved the ones that we went out of town for. It felt so cool. That's where I first figured out that I enjoyed traveling. I just wish that I'd had a car back in those days because it was hard to see anything. Like I was in St. Louis. I didn't see the arch the first time I was there because I was 16 and didn't have a car. Well, I did, but it was at home. I had taken a bus and was staying in a hotel.
Right.
Yep.
And I was sharing a room with someone I don't even remember, which tells you how bad the experience was. Anyway, so what's going on in your world?
Well, we went trick-or-treating the other day.
Yes, and you got lots of candy.
We got lots of candy.
Candy, that's what I said.
Yeah. I just cut you off. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's been about 2 months already with my current partner.
Ooh.
We're just gonna call her Bunny on here.
I was gonna say
yes, Bunny, who we
I like Bunny.
not to use her real name.
Yes, we're not gonna use her real name for privacy.
Yes.
So you and Bunny are going well, I take it?
Yeah.
You seem very happy when we talk about her, so
yeah,
that's a good thing. And you don't seem like you're vibrating against this plane of frustration, whereas with Bug and some others that you have. So I like that.
Yeah. She's very nice. I I like her a lot. But let me see. I just I can't remember if I said this, but I'm wearing the tail to Gemini right now.
No, you didn't say that.
This is part of her. I don't know. This is part of her sort of costume.
Oh, okay.
Partial. She's a partial right now. But wow, I am spacing out a lot. Okay.
Well, in fairness to you, my dear, you had a late night last night with you going and trick-or-treating with your siblings, and it's a little bit later than we would normally record due to the fact that I am working a later shift this week, so.
Yeah.
And then your TikTok is doing well as well.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I just posted a video and it got I think over 17 comments.
And a lot of likes too.
Yeah, a lot of likes too.
And you just put it up at 6:15.
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't that long ago.
Nope.
So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Yep.
So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. Trying to find it.
Yeah, in fact, come to think of it, the last time we did a catching up with Krysta, you had really just started with Bunny.
Yeah.
So
that would be
that's almost 10 weeks.
Yep. And I'm pretty happy, so.
I like that you're happy.
And you guys have seen Bunny.
Yeah, I've seen video. I have not met Bunny, like I met Connor, but I have not met Bunny yet.
Bunny it might take a while to get.
Yes, I know.
I need to gain her mother's trust before I can meet up with Bunny and introduce you guys to her.
Excuse me, fair enough.
Did you have anything else that you want to talk to us about tonight, Krysta?
My bad, I was yawning. No. Not really, I'm sorry. I'll do it again.
Man, you're mean to me. You know how hard...
That's okay, Daddy. We got this.
All right. Well, thank you for your Krysta's Corner and catching up with Krysta, as you always do. Let me get some disclaimers out of the way. We are going to talk Jack the Ripper. However, we will not be doing an in-depth examination of the wounds and mutilation that occurred to the victims. We strive to keep a PG-13 rating and will continue to do so even as Chris gets older. If you want that sort of gruesome conversation, there are other true crime podcasts out there that will cover all of that in detail. Also, this is going to be an overview. We're going to cover the events and a few details. There are entire podcasts devoted to Ripper lore, and if you are interested, they are easy to find. Finally, some of our suspects suffer from mental illness. One commits suicide. So as always, when we deal with these subjects, we want to say that mental illness is very important. And if you suffer, please take care of yourself and do your best to take care of those around you as well. And if you suffer from depression or the urge to unalive yourself, let's put it that way, remember to call 811. It's a suicide prevention hotline. Call a friend, reach out to someone. Frankly, you matter. We want you around. So those are the disclaimers I wanted to get out of the way.
Perfect.
Now, before we get into the killings or anything else, we got to talk about Whitechapel in 1888. It was lit at night by gaslight, which was not nearly as effective as modern lights. The streets became quickly shrouded in shadows. Darkness was poorly broken at best in this part of the city. It was a difficult time and place to live, and even growing up there was problematic. Many looked at children as a drain on parents' resources, and it is believed 2 out of every 10 children born in Whitechapel died before they reached the age of 5. Many were homeless, staying in common rooms and doss houses. They would rent a bed for the night, or in some cases, taverns would string a line, like a clothesline, across a room, and people would pay to sleep standing up, slumped over the line. People pawned clothing like hats and boots. There were jobs that were basically sales jobs where people would making matchboxes and sell them, or they would tailor or make boots. These sort of, we'll do it and sell it to you. These paid very little, and couples would sometimes go hops picking, where they pick the hops to make beer and sell them for a small sum. Lucky families in the Whitechapel area may have had their own home, but these were wretched places where the family lived, ate, cooked, and slept in a single room. Rags were stuffed in broken windows for warmth, and these places were often infested with fleas or other insects. Now, next to Whitechapel was Spitalfields, which suffered a number of the same conditions, although it did have some nicer areas. There were fewer jobs for women than men, so prostitution was quite common in Whitechapel around this time. In fact, several of the books I have read on the subject talked about how in the early 1900s, 1910s, people would talk about how grandma must have turned a few tricks in her day. Yeah, so it was that common. Now, this was an unsavory job, even if you take into account those at the time referring to prostitutes as the unfortunates, or my particular loathsome favorite, the Daughters of Joy. Now, in today's world, when one hires a prostitute, the service happens in a car or a motel room, so a place of relative comfort and safety. Back then, things tend to happen up against a fence or a wall, usually with the woman leaning against it, so it was in this atmosphere that the murders occurred. Now, I'm going to turn over the story to my dear Laura, who's going to introduce us to a woman named Martha Tabram, who may or may not have been the Ripper's first victim.
Alrighty. So we're going to start out and speak about Martha Tabram. On April 7th, 1888, Martha Tabram, who was born with the name Martha White, had up to a point had a rather nice life. She married her husband and lived with him and her 2 children at a home next to her parents for some time. But Martha was fond of drink. She drank a lot, and often that led to fights with her husband and her children. Eventually, her husband could stand things no longer, and he left Martha. He paid her a weekly allowance of 12 shillings a week, which is roughly equivalent of 8 cents in American money today. He reduced this amount to just under 3 shillings a week when he discovered that she was living with another man. However, her new man, Thomas Carpenter by name, also fought with her over her penchant for drinking and her habit of staying out all evening. Eventually, they were kicked out of the room they were renting, with rent owing, and broke up and went their separate ways. So Martha Tabram was living on the street for some time. We know that she and Mary Connolly, who was a fellow streetwalker who used the nickname Pearly Paul, were drinking with 2 soldiers at the Angel and Crown public house. The 4 left the public house with Tabram and Carpenter leading their clients into different alleys. Tabram took her client to the George Yards off of Whitechapel High Street. Around 2 a.m., a resident of the George Yards heard a woman cry, "Murder!" But domestic violence and shouts were common. Around 3 a.m., a man returning home after his job of driving a hansom cab saw a body lying on the first landing as he walked up to the stairs. But often vagrants would come and sleep on the landing, so he thought nothing of it. Around 5 a.m., a woman came down the stairs and saw Martha and realized she was dead. She had suffered 39 knife wounds, but there was no attempt at evisceration or mutilation. Coroners put her death somewhere between 2 and 2:30 a.m., but no one heard anything definitive. There are many who think Martha is the first murder of the man who would become known as Jack the Ripper before his MO had become established. And others feel she definitely was not part of the victims of Jack the Ripper. Now, we probably should have a quick word from our sponsor.
Probably should.
Hey guys,
Yes, Chris.
I feel sponsored.
You do? That's
Yes.
awesome. Me too.
Yay.
So, should fill in the other half of the story here. Now we're going to talk about Mary Ann or Polly Nichols. On August 31st.
Now, I should point out the dates I'm using, those are the dates they died.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, okay. All right. So, Mary Ann, or Polly Nichols, as she was referred to, was murdered, I guess, right? On August 31st, 1888. Mary Ann Nichols had begun life with good prospects and even at one time had a good marriage and children. However, like Martha Tabram, she liked her drink, and this made life hard for her husband and family. Eventually, her husband left her and took the children with him. Now, some claimed that Mary Ann's drinking was not the problem, but rather an affair that her husband had carried on with the nurse who delivered their final child. However, her husband claimed to have proof that their marriage continued for 3 more years after the affair, and it was Nichols' drinking which had torn them up. Okay, can I just pause for a moment and say that I wonder how much of the drinking had to do with the fact that he was having affairs while he was knocking her up. But that just is my female point of view on this. God, how dare she be fond of drink while her husband's out philandering with nurses who are delivering their children? How dare she? What is wrong with her anyway? Has she no coup? I'm sorry, but
She's
that's
trying
a
to
little
cope,
bit
girly pop.
ludicrous. That's a little ridiculous.
She's trying to cope, girly pop. What do you want her to do?
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you want her to do? Talk to a therapist?
Anyway, it's neither here nor there. We can't bring her back, and it's whatever. So, again, the husband claimed that he continued the marriage with her even though he was messing around on her, and that it was the drinking that had torn them up. For some time after their split, the husband was paying Mary Ann 5 shillings a week in support. However, about 3.75 cents in today's American money, after he discovered she was living with another man and working as a prostitute, he discontinued that support. She lived in Lambeth Workhouse for some time. A workhouse found employment for paupers and took care of the elderly and disabled. But when they found her a job working for a religious couple as a servant, and subsequently she stole from her employers, the workhouse kicked her out. It is also possible that her bosses, who were known teetotalers, did not care for her drinking habits. Whatever the case, she left their employ and began working as a prostitute once more. On August 30th, she was at a doss house when the attendant attempted to collect rent for her bed. She didn't have it, but she told him not to rent the bed to anyone else, pointing to the new hat she had just purchased. "Look at this jolly bonnet," she said. "I will have my doss money soon enough." With that, she left. She was last seen walking down Osborne Street by a friend who thought she seemed very drunk, often stopping to lean on things for support. This was around 2:30 in the morning on the 31st. At 3:40 in the morning, she was found by Charles Cross, who at first thought she was a tarpaulin.
A tarpaulin, yeah.
I don't know what that is.
A tarp, we call them tarps now, that's like just a big swath of cloth.
Okay.
Used for a lot of things.
Okay.
They also make them out of plastic now, although they didn't then.
Sure. Okay, got it. All right, perfect. So basically a roll of material.
Yeah.
But he quickly realized that it was a dead woman. Her throat was brutally cut, and she had...
I'm using bits in the British sense.
I see. And she had her bits stabbed a couple of times as well as a couple of stabs to her abdomen. She was found in an area that was called Buck's Row, though these days it has been renamed Durward Street. Now, murder was pretty common in Whitechapel, especially murders of prostitutes, so at this point there isn't much of a fuss about the murders. However, that is about to change.
So let's move on to meet the second or third victim, depending on whether you include Tabram. And the thing about Tabram for me is that more and more modern researchers do count her, because we understand now that serial killers don't just start out with the same thing. They grow. Mm-hmm. And so from Tabram could be an inexperienced killer, and then everybody else could show his experience, you know. But let's talk Annie Chapman. Now, she was born Eliza Ann Smith. Annie Chapman was the first of 5 children born in Paddington to George Smith and Ruth Chapman. She eventually became a domestic, aka a maid or a servant, before she lost that job due to her fondness for drink. Are you seeing a pattern here?
I think drink.
Yeah.
Drink was very common in Whitechapel at that time because, I mean, it was a squalid slum for the most part. Living there, you knew you weren't doing well. Yeah, alcohol was just a way to sort of try to ride that out, you know?
I got it.
Now, eventually she met and married John Chapman, and with whom she had several children. John was as fond of drink as Annie, and the two fought often. However, Annie left, and John paid her 10 shillings a week in maintenance until he himself died of an alcohol-related illness. Annie floated around Spitalfields and Whitechapel for a while. She occasionally found work as a charwoman, which is a woman who cleans houses or offices, and lived with a man who made sieves for a living. You know what a sieve is, yeah?
Yeah, a sieve.
Yeah. Anyway, and acquaintances who knew her around that time dubbed her Anne Sivvy or Siffy.
Interesting.
Now, after the death of her former husband and the loss of her maintenance money, the man broke it off with her and moved out of Whitechapel, which suggests that maybe he was staying to get part of that nickel she was getting every week or whatever.
Right?
You know. Afterwards, Annie became involved with a bricklayer's laborer named Edward Stanley, though most simply called him the pensioner. At the time, she supported herself by selling her crochet work, selling antimacassars, which are decorative cloths put in the back of chairs to protect them from grease and dirt, and flowers that she made, and occasionally casual prostitution. On September 1st, 1888, Annie got in a fight with fellow indigent Eliza Cooper. Some thought it was because both were interested in the attentions of a hawker named Harry. Hawkers was the name at the time for salesfolk. However, Cooper later said that it started because Annie Chapman had borrowed a bar of soap from her, and when Cooper had asked for the bar's return, Chapman had slammed a halfpenny down on a nearby table and commanded her to get a halfpenny's worth of soap. Later, after much drinking on both their parts, they got into a fight at the Britannia public house, which led to Annie getting a bruised cheek, a black eye, and a bruise on her chest. According to both the lodging house deputy, Timothy Donovan, and the watchman, John Evans, who went by the name Brummy, shortly after midnight on September 8th, Chapman had been lacking the required money for her nightly lodging. She drank a pint of beer in the kitchen with fellow lodger Frederick Stevens at approximately 12:10 a.m., before informing another lodger that she had earlier visited her sister in Vauxhall and that her family had given her 5D. Now, I should have looked up what a D was, but I don't know. I know it's not drachma, but I'm not sure what's less than a shilling in English money back then. So forgive me. Now, let's see. Stevens then observed Chapman take a box of pills from her pocket. This box then broke, whereupon Chapman wrapped the pills in a section of envelope she had taken from the mantelpiece before leaving the property. At approximately 1:35 a.m., Chapman returned to the lodging house with a baked potato, which she ate again before leaving again the premises with the likely intention of earning money to go pay for a bed via prostituting herself. She told John Evans, the watchman, "I won't be long, Brummy. See that Tim keeps the bed for me." Evans last saw Chapman walking down the direction of Spitalfields Market. Mrs. Elizabeth Long was walking along Hanbury Street. She heard a man's in the Spitalfields when she passed Annie Chapman talking to a man directly outside 29 Hanbury Street. She heard the man say, "Will you?" To which Annie replied, "Yes." Shortly before 5 a.m. on the 8th of September, the son of a resident of 29 Hanbury Street, John Richardson's, entered the backyard of the property to check on the padlocked cellar in the yard was still intact and to trim a loose piece of leather from his boot. Richardson verified the cellar was still padlocked, then sat down on the rear steps of the property to trim the loose leather from his boot. Noticing nothing untoward, he then exited the property via the front door approximately 3 minutes later, having not proceeded beyond the steps to the backyard. At approximately 5:15 a.m., a tenant of 27 Hanbury Street named Albert Kadash entered the yard of the property to use the lavatory. Kadash later informed the police that he had heard a woman say no before hearing the sound of something or someone falling against the fence dividing the backyards of 27 and 29 Hanbury Street. He did not investigate these sounds. Annie Chapman's mutilated body was discovered shortly before 6 a.m. by an elderly resident of 29 Hanbury Street named John Davis. Davis noticed the front door was now open while the back door was shut. Her body was lying on the ground near the doorway to the backyard with her head less than 6 inches, or about 15 centimeters, from the steps to the property. Davis alerted 3 men named James Green, James Kent, and Henry Holland to this discovery before all 3 ran down Commercial Street to find a policeman as Davis reported his discovery to the nearest police station. Eventually, she was autopsied by police surgeon Dr. George Bagster Phillips. He noted that the death was done in the same fashion as the killing of Mary Ann Nichols. He felt they were definitely connected. She had been violently stabbed in the neck at least twice, and the blades pulled through the skin with force. So effectively, her throat was cut, but in a pretty brutal fashion. He also found evidence that the abdomen and the sexual organs had also been mutilated. Fun. Our Jack the Ripper is a happy boy. Now, with this murder tied as it was to Mary Ann Nichols' death, the people of Whitechapel were in an uproar, and the police felt public pressure to find and arrest the killers of these 2 girls.
Oh, shoot, my bad. I am so sorry. At this point, most referred to the killer as the Whitechapel murderer, or perhaps occasionally he was referred to as Leather Apron. That's kind of stupid, not gonna lie. If I was a killer, probably wouldn't want to be named that, but he deserves it, so whatever. When police suspected a man named John Pizer, okay. Pizer, known for wearing a leather apron and threatening prostitutes with a knife, he has not yet got their nickname that will become synonymous with these murders. That of Jack the Ripper.
So at this point, he's still the Whitechapel murderer. And while there's a hue and cry about, there's not much of one. That's going to change. And here's why. Jack's legend is growing as is the hue and cry to catch him. And in a place filled with violence against women, especially prostitutes like those in the East End of London, every violent crime against a prostitute is a potential Jack the Ripper attack. And I'm talking about the way the people in the East End see it, not. And a lot of the papers are carrying daily reports of the Ripper or the police's attempts to catch him. On September 30th, 1888, there are 2 murders, and this ramps up the terror in Whitechapel even more. Elizabeth Stride, born Elizabeth Gustafsdotter in Sweden, had come to London to work as a domestic for a gentleman in Hyde Park, at least according to one tale she told. The problem with Elizabeth Stride talked a lot, and not a lot of her stories agreed with each other.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of this is just guesswork.
So she wasn't necessarily as fond of drink as she was as fond of spinning her own tales.
Yeah, but she was fond of drink too.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, okay, to say that, it's like there are parts of Independence we wouldn't go to because they're fairly crime ridden. And I would imagine alcoholism is pretty high in those sections of the city.
I would imagine.
And it's the same kind of thing here.
Sure. Absolutely. You're just trying to get through one day to the next. I get it.
Yeah. So eventually she met and married John Thomas Stride, a man 22 years her senior, who was also a ship's carpenter. Early in their marriage, they opened a coffee shop on Indian Docks Road, but eventually shut it down, probably due to financial hardship. After that, their relationship was tumultuous, possibly due to financial hardships, possibly due to drinking, possibly due to both. Liz Stride often appeared before the court for her drunken antics and temper or the use of profane language, which is weird to think they hauled people into court for, using language we don't use on our podcast. But I just got to edit it. I don't got to go to court over it. Eventually, the two separated, and Liz began an on and off again relationship with Michael Kidney. At one of the points where she was on the outs with Kidney, subsequent eyewitness accounts of Stride's movement later in the evening of the 29th of September and in the early morning of September 30th indicate she may have been in the company of one or more acquaintances and or clients. The first of these individuals is described as a short man with a dark mustache wearing a morning suit with a bowler hat, with whom she was seen approximately 11 p.m. at a location close to Burner Street. A second eyewitness count by laborer William Marshall placed Stride in the company of a man wearing a peaked cap, black coat, and dark trousers, standing on the pavement opposite number 58 Burner Street at approximately 11:45 p.m. Now, according to Marshall, Stride had stood with this decently dressed individual, and the two had repeatedly kissed before the man had said to her, "You would say anything but your prayers." At 12:35 a.m., PC William Smith saw Stride with a man wearing a hard felt hat standing opposite the International Working Men's Educational Club, a socialist and predominantly Jewish social club at 40 Burner Street. It's Burner Street, which has since been renamed Henriques Street in Whitechapel. The man was carrying a package about 18 inches long. Having no reason to feel suspicious, the constable continued on his beat in the direction of Commercial Road. Between 12:35 and 12:45 a.m., dock worker James Brown saw a woman he believed to be Stride standing with her back against the wall on the corner of Berners Street, speaking to the man of average build in a long black coat. Brown heard Stride say, "No, not tonight, some other night." On Saturday nights, the club usually hosted free talks that packed the building full of people. The evening of 29th, between 50 and 100 people had shown up for a talk called "Why Jews Should Be Socialists." And dozens of men had stuck around after the talk to socialize and sing. Okay, I don't get that, but whatever.
Well, there weren't, I mean.
Yeah, I know. What else was there to do? Not a lot. You're right. Sing and drink, mainly. Wasn't any internet. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, at 1 a.m., the steward of the club, Louis Diemschutz, not sure, steered his pony and two-wheeled barrow into the passageway between number 40 and 42 on Burner Street. The party was still roaring inside, and light and sound dimly illuminated the alley. When the pony shied to the left, almost knocking into the passage wall, Diemschutz halted to investigate. He saw what he recognized as a woman lying on the ground facing him away from the center of the passage. Before investigating any further, Diemschutz became worried about his wife and rushed inside to check on her. Surprised by his frantic inquiries, the men inside assured Stewart that Mrs. Diemschutz was fine and asked what the problem was. Lewis said, "There's a woman lying in the yard," he said, "but I cannot say whether she's drunk or dead." Many have speculated the pony was actually scared because it saw a man duck swiftly into the shadow of the alley. Further, some say that had Deemschutz stayed in the passageway rather than rushing indoors, he may have caught sight of the Ripper himself. A young tailor named Isaac Kozabrodsky accompanied Mr. Deemschutz outside while Mrs. Deemschutz stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched. When Mr. Deemschutz shone the light of his candle on the woman's face, Mrs. Deemschutz saw blood trickling up from the body into the yard along the gutter, clotting to a pool near her pallid face. The group of men dispersed in the neighborhood, crying out for police. They went up Fairclough Street and back down again, coming into contact with a housekeeper named Edward Spooner, who came along to investigate what had happened. Meanwhile, Police Constable Henry Lamb was walking with another constable on his Commercial Road beat. Two of the men from the Socialist Club caught up with them and brought them back to Dutfield's yard. Lamb arrived around 1:10 a.m., then went to some Dr. Frederick William Blackwell. The doctor's assistant, Edward Johnston, beat him to the scene and found the woman all warm except the hands. Her neck had almost completely drained of blood. Dr. Blackwell arrived to investigate around 1:15 a.m., and the square was full of investigators and police for the next several hours. Now, because her throat was cut, but she was not further mutilated, there are those who believe she is not a Ripper victim. However, she was dispatched with a slit throat like all the other victims except Abram. However, most believe the killer was interrupted by the arrival of Deemschutz, which is why he went on to seek another victim in Catherine Eddowes. Now, Catherine Eddowes was one of 12 children, born to George Eddowes and Catherine Eddowes Sr. Mom worked as a cook, and her dad worked on tin plate, which I'm not sure what that is, but it was tin plate stamping was a common career at the time.
Tin plate, they used kind of like we use siding now and tile. So they would use it for ceilings, for decorative ceilings. They would use it on the outsides of house for decoration.
Oh.
There was a lot of different things that they used tin plating for.
Cool. I did not know that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Now, Catherine was raised in this home. It was a good home, but both of her parents had died by the time she was just 15. She and 4 other Eddowes children were sent to live in an orphanage. She got into tin plate stamping like her father. However, she was let go a few months later, possibly for stealing. She bounced around doing various factory jobs before resettling in London's East End. Now, she had lived with a former soldier named Thomas Conway and even bore 3 children by him. She even went so far as to have his initials crudely tattooed on one arm. However, Thomas passed away, and later she began a relationship with John Kelly, a fruit salesman. Initially, while living in and around Spitalfields, Eddowes most often earned money by performing domestic work such as cleaning and sewing for the Jewish community in nearby Brick Lane. Because when she knew Yiddish, actually both she and Stride both knew Yiddish. They had learned it so that they could communicate with Jewish people who had flooded into the section from various Eastern European countries. Yeah. She was earning money occasionally by cleaning and sewing for the Jewish community in nearby Brick Lane, although she is believed to also have occasionally taken to casual prostitution to pay her daily rent. Now, she and Kelly also developed a ritual to go hot picking in September to help raise money. The two had only recently returned from such a trip, and had spent most of their money. They split their last 6 pence, 4 pence going to Kelly so he could afford a bed in a casual ward he often slept in, and 2 pence going to Eddowes so she could get a bed at a ward she frequently. Oddly, when she had arrived at the ward the previous evening, the attendant had asked her where she had been, to which she answered she had been hot picking, and then she said she thought she would collect the ward for the Whitechapel murderer. I think I know him, she said. Later, a constable would find a crowd gathered near 29 Aldgate High Street, and the cause for the crowd would be a very drunk Catherine Eddowes. Unable to get her to stand, the constable took her to the local police station and put her in a cell until she recovered. She gave her name as Nothing, and within 20 minutes was passed out in a cell. Upon waking, she asked the constable on duty when she could be released, and he responded when she could take care of herself. Because, by God, these were police, and they weren't going to let her go drunk.
Oh, sure.
She was released 20 minutes later with a jaunty, "All right, good night, old cock." She left the police station and headed towards Church Passage and Aldgate. It was 1 a.m. By 1:44 a.m., her dead, mutilated body had been discovered by Police Constable Edward Watkins. He had passed through the area around 1:30, and it had been devoid of anyone. Her throat was slashed. She had gruesome injuries to her abdomen and sexual organs. Witnesses reported they had seen her earlier with a man in a loose-fitting, salt and pepper loose jacket, a peaked watchman's cap, who gave the overall impression of a sailor. Her hand was upon his chest, but not in a way that suggested she was resisting him. This is what the witnesses are saying. Further complicating this crime is the fact that in nearby Goulston Street, a message was discovered written on the wall that read, "The Jews," and this was spelled Jewes by whoever wrote the message, so clearly not a real literate person, because that's not how you spell Jews, are the ones who won't be blamed for nothing. Or it might have said the Jews are not the ones who will be blamed for nothing. Reason we don't know is it got written down 2 different ways by people who saw it, and
there's no way to verify which way was correct.
Right, because the police wanted to take a picture of it. However, a commander saw it, and anti-Semitic tensions were running high at this point, and there was a lot of anti-Semitic groups.
So they had it cleaned up.
Yeah, so he had it cleaned up without waiting for anybody to take a picture. So we don't know exactly what it said, but it seemed to imply that the Jews are responsible somehow for these murders.
Gotcha.
Since her body was discovered in the city of London, different doctors examined her and opined that the slaughtering was done by someone who was unskilled and completely untrained in organ removal.
The Dear Boss letter. On 27th of September, the Central News Agency received a boastful letter addressed to the boss that at first they completely ignored. However, on September 29th, 2 days later, the Central News Agency gave it to the police, who believed it was a hoax. There are so many howevers that I thought I just went back.
You're good.
However, when Stride and Eddowes. Okay. When Stride and Eddowes were murdered on the 30th, the police were forced to take a closer look at the letter. It read as follows: "Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. The joke about the leather apron gave me the real fits. I am down on the..." Do you want me to say that word?
You can skip it. Though I will say it's a glaring bad euphemism for prostitutes, and we'll just...
You can say it, Krysta.
Okay,
It's
I'm
okay.
just like, I am down on whores, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and I want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I've saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Haha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send police officers just for jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp that I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving a trader name. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it, no luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Now, if this letter had not been received, there would be no Jack the Ripper, as we know it. Further, a letter from the same individual on October 1st with information that had only been in very early papers, but
Most did not see those papers. The early papers did not go to Whitechapel.
But since most did not see those papers, it became sort of proof. Sorry, this is really weird, and I can't rearrange it to where my brain will work with it evenly. So
you're doing good.
We're almost certainly saying these things had to be the murderer. The truth is, both these letters were almost certainly the work of someone other than the killer, and many believe it is a reporter trying to give more meat to the story. The second letter reads justly, I was not codding dear old boss when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time number 1 squealed a bit. I couldn't finish straight off. Had not the time to get ears for police. Thanks for keeping last letter back till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper.
That was a lot. Good job. All right. So now we have to talk about Mary Kelly. Mary Kelly was the last of the Canonical Five. Mary Kelly was in her mid-20s, much younger than the other victims, and she was born in Ireland. We know very little of her early life because she told so many stories about them. Stories we cannot prove to be true, but we cannot either disprove. She received infrequent letters from Ireland, so we do know that part is true. She claimed her family was well-to-do, but we have no proof of that. We do know that, like many of the others, she was a drinker and would often sing when she was drunk, though those who encountered her in this condition would talk of her meanness. She had come to live at 13 Miller's Court with her on-again, off-again relationship with Joseph Barnett. Now, the area had become known as McCarthy's Rents, as the area was rented by John McCarthy. It was also a reference to both the rooms available and the ladies who rented them. Elizabeth Prater, who resided in the room directly above Kelly's and who had been awoken by her kitten walking over her neck, and Sarah Lewis, who had slept at number 2 Miller's Court on the 8th and 9th of November, both reported hearing a faint cry of murder between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m., but did not react because they reported that it was common to hear such cries in the East End. Lewis described this cry as only one scream. I took no notice of it. She claimed to have slept and not to have heard people moving in and out of the court throughout the night. Prater did leave her room at approximately 5:30 a.m. to walk to the 10 Bells pub for a drink of rum. She saw nothing suspicious. Now, around 10:45 a.m., John McCarthy sent Thomas Boyer to collect Mary's rent. He, however, could not enter the room and peeked in a window. There he saw Mary Kelly's horribly mutilated corpse. By far the worst mutilation had occurred with Kelly, as the killer had both time and privacy. He burned Mary's clothes for light, and the fire burned so hot to melt the solder on a tea kettle.
Now at the time, there were believed to be other victims. However, none matched the MO of Jack.
MO is short for a Latin phrase. Modus operandi means the way a killer does things.
We also need to discuss the From Hell letter. George Lusk was the head of the Mile End Vigilance Committee, and as such received numerous tips about and letters supposedly from Jack the Ripper. Reads as follows: From Hell, Mr. Lusk. Sore.
There are a lot of misspellings in the letter. It's written as it was written by the killer, so just do your best.
Okay.
I can tell you what they're supposed to be, but yeah, that sore is supposed to be sir, but...
Okay. Sore. I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out. If you only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch Me When You Can, Mr. Lusk. Now this letter came with half a human kidney that sort of matched up with the kidney that had been removed from Catherine Ado's. God. It was half a guinea kidney, meaning it was inflamed by alcohol consumption, and appeared to be suffering from Bright's disease. While it was certainly a human kidney, Dr. What is up with these names?
Welcome to Britain.
Oh my God. Dr. Openshaw, stop it with the names now, please. The man who examined it did not believe it belonged to the victim, and certainly history at this point seems to agree.
Good job.
Good job, Chris.
All right, let's take another moment for a word from our sponsors.
Hey, babe.
Yes, dear.
I am super sponsored.
Yay. All right. So now we need to talk about some of the suspects. First up, John Pizer, also known as Jack Pizer, also known as Leather Apron. John was a bootmaker who had a habit of mistreating prostitutes, but he was not a killer. A scare after the murder of Annie Chapman sent him into hiding. And when I say a scare, basically a woman pointed him out to a police officer. There, that's Leather Apron. And he turned around and said, I don't know what she's talking about, officer. She's been following me around all day doing this sort of thing. And so the officer turned to talk to him. John Pizer took off, went to go hide in his family's house.
No.
Problem is, he was located by a man he'd known for many years, Constable Thick. He was arrested and investigated, and his alibis held up, and he was released. Now, anti-Semitism was strong then, and many of the articles and editorials in local papers got residents in Whitechapel so stirred up, he almost got lynched.
Wow.
Long story short, Leather Apron, not Jack the Ripper.
Gotcha. That seems a little excessive, but we definitely know how mob mentality works. So definitely a thing. All right. One of the men who oversaw the investigation and his favorite subject.
I somehow removed his name. It's Melville McNaughton is the guy's name. He was one of the men who
It's fine. It's fine. So Melville McNaughton was one of the men who oversaw the investigation. His favorite suspect for MJ or Montague John Druitt. He described Druitt as a 41-year-old doctor from a good family who considered him to be Jack the Ripper and believed that he had committed suicide shortly after the Miller's Court murder because his brain gave way. However, MJ Druitt was 31 at the time of his death, not 41. He had just been dismissed from the Valentine School for reason or reasons unknown. And with the school keeping those reasons hushed up, it's very possible the school was firing him due to some scandal. And he was pursuing training as a barrister, which meant he was no slouch in the thinking department. It's likely he took his own life because of the dismissal from the Valentine School. He was possibly homosexual and almost certainly not Jack the Ripper.
Something to remember about this time and place. Homosexuals, not treated well.
No.
Easily killed.
Women, not treated well.
True.
Established.
True. Easily killed or put in mental institutions. So, MJ Druitt, who may or may not, we don't know because they just literally, but he certainly seems from some indication to have possibly been homosexual. He may have come on to a student, or a student may have caught him in a compromising position. Whatever the case, he was let go and they kept it hush hush.
Right.
So that to me explains the suicide. Now, again, I'm not a big fan of suicide. I'm sure he could have come up. He was training to be a barrister, which is a kind of lawyer. So,
It is what it is. All right. Krysta, you want to take our next one, babe?
Melville
Do you want me to take it? Do you want me to
I
take
want
it?
these names to stop being so hard. McNaughton describes Ostrog as a Russian doctor of the worst family and irresponsible criminal, irrepressible criminal whose whereabouts during the murder could never be
ascertained.
Ascertained. However, Michael's record is largely devoid of violence. He was mostly a thief, and a petty thief at that. The one violent act he committed was pulling a pistol on police superintendent in a police station. More importantly, however, Ostrog had been in France in 1887, where he was imprisoned in a lunatic asylum for over the next 2 years. So if he wasn't in the country, he could hardly be a murderer.
Right? Absolutely.
Let's talk Aaron Kosminski. A Polish Jew, Kosminski was another subject favored by MacNaughton. He was certainly insane. He would refuse food that people offered him because the voices in his head told him to do so.
That's right.
He refused to bathe and to allow others to bathe him, also because the voices in his head told him so. He ate food out of the gutter because the voices in his head told him to do so. I see a pattern here.
Yeah, just a little bit.
He ended his life in an asylum, and when I say that, I am not saying he took his life, but rather that's where he was when he died. And many claim that a recent DNA test on a scarf supposedly found on Chapman contains Kosminski's DNA. However, I don't think the pathology of a guy hearing voices that tell him to eat food out of the gutter and maybe attack people the voices don't like isn't the sort of guy who can convince women to go with them, kill them quickly and quietly, and escape the area with ease.
Maybe.
Further, no one knows the provenance of that scarf, as in, where was it for the 100 or so years before it turned up? We simply don't know.
Absolutely.
We don't know where it was kept, who had kept it, or why. So I'm going to say Aaron Kosminski, not the guy.
Never know. All right. Also need to talk about Severin Kalowski, aka George Chapman. Inspector Aberline, the chief inspector working on the Rippers case, favored Chapman as a suspect. In 1881, Kalowski qualified as a junior surgeon, and when he arrived in London in 1887, he worked as an assistant hairdresser. He left London for America at about the time of the murders, and ended about the same time that murders ended, and worked at the White Hart pub in George Yard in 1890. After returning from America, his wife died after a long illness, and police believed George was responsible for poisoning her. However, while the murders did end once Chapman went to the States, no murder started there that matched the MO for the Ripper. Also, he was a poisoner, and those who switch MOs like that are very rare. So I'm not sure that there's enough evidence to actually support Chapman as being Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, one of Aberline's things with him was he thought Chapman was working at the White Hart when Tabram died. He didn't start working there until 2 years later.
Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha.
Krysta, Tom, or I can get it.
I got it.
Okay.
Thomas Cutbush is another suspect. He was accused by the newspaper without directly naming him in 1894. Many thought that he contracted syphilis from a prostitute, which is why he attacked them. But records of his imprisonment reveal the cause as hereditary. Although his aunt thought he got it by studying too much. He struck another prisoner once for no reason, but was mostly quiet and kept to himself. As his madness progressed, he went quiet and refused to bathe or otherwise take care of himself. Clearly, this is not a criminal mastermind capable of murdering prostitutes and sneaking away successfully.
Let's bring up Dr. Francis Tumblety. Tumblety was an American who came to England and referred to himself as a doctor. he was really more of a quack than anything else. He was accused of having several specimens of uteri by a con man. Mind you, the con man is making the accusation, so
Yeah, take it with a grain of
exactly. And when the New York police were asked if he could be Jack the Ripper, the New York police laughed. Certainly, Tumblety was a quack and a bit of a schemer, but his crimes mostly stemmed from making sexual offers to other men. Hardly a good candidate for Jack the Ripper.
So the next one we want to look at is James Maybrick.
And I'm a cat because I just caught a typo. Portioner is poisoner.
Yeah. So James Maybrick was a poisoner and a ledger found in the 1990s purported to be Maybrick's admittance that he was also Jack the Ripper. However, if he is, he doesn't seem to know the dates of the murders he committed. He gets many details wrong, and further, he confesses to murders that there are no record of ever happening. Plus, the ledger is missing its first 30 pages or so, which is very suspicious. I think that maybe the evidence pointing to Maybrick is a hoax and misdirection, and we can safely remove him from our consideration.
So that brings up Walter Sickert. Sickert is a guy that's been accused over and over and over and over again. Sometimes he's the killer. Sometimes he helps the killer. Sometimes he helps the killer get away. Especially since Patricia Cornwall's Jack the Ripper case closed came out several decades ago. He has been accused of everything from being an accomplice to committing the actual murders. However, there is some evidence that he may not have been in England when the murders occurred, and nothing ties him to the murders. Mitochondrial DNA possibly ties him to the From Hell letter, but since between 1 and 10% of the population shares similar mitochondrial DNA, it's hardly unique to Sickert. Further, even if he wrote the letters, we know almost certainly that none of the letter writers were actually the killer. So the case seems very much still open. Sorry, Patricia Cornwall. Mm-hmm. And that brings us to conspiracies, because this is not by any means a complete list of suspects. No. There's a lot more.
Yes.
And a lot of them are tied together in weird conspiracies. For example, Clarence Victor, who was the prince at the time, a member of the royal family. He was for years when I was growing up considered case closed. He was the killer. Probably not. He was not in the country when several of the murders happened. He was in Scotland on a hunting trip, and unless he had some way to travel that no one else had, not happening. The Freemasons are listed as part of a conspiracy to kill them because of part of their rites is tied weirdly to the way some of the women were mutilated. But like, it's clearly like if you read the words and then look at what happened, you're like, you're reaching reaching here. This. And they were also implicated in conspiracy between William Gull, who was the physician in ordinary to the Queen herself. So there was also, it was thought to be a midwife. So Jane the Ripper, or Jill the Ripper, as she's been called, who was killing prostitutes to protect royalty, who had a child with a commoner, to a recent entry where not all 5 victims were prostitutes and were all the victims of different killers. I firmly believe if we could somehow command the Ripper to reveal him or herself, we would all go, who?
Probably.
And so that brings us to our summary, our final thoughts, which for me are, I think if we knew who Jack the Ripper was, like if he'd been caught, nobody would care. It's the fact that this happened caused such an uproar.
And no, they never had an actual person that they could say you definitely did it.
Right. And even later, people like, oh, well, we ascertained it was this guy, or we knew it was that guy. But the people they're pointing fingers at couldn't have done it either.
Right.
So I don't think the police had. And I mean, let's be fair. Like, fingerprinting hadn't become a thing yet.
Right.
It was still a few years away, not many, but a few. They thought about using a bloodhound to try to track the man, but like the reason the one place they could have really done it was the Miller's Court murder of Mary Kelly, but there was so much blood in that scene, they thought that there was no way the dog could pick up a clean scent.
Right.
So it was just, they did their best, but
right.
I mean, crime solving at that time was someone saw you and told the police, or you left something behind that the police could tie to you. That was really it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, I mean, it was a different world, and there were different pieces of information that they could even collect. So, I'm with you. It was a terrible thing, but I mean, we've definitely talked about worse. I just think it was mostly the way that he went about it, he or she went about it, and the fact that they never could comfortably say, yes, this was the culprit.
Yeah, well, it's like Oscar Wilde, I believe. I could be wrong, but I think it was Oscar Wilde who talked about how he felt like the classes need to be equalized,
Mm-hmm.
and that Jack the Ripper was kind of a genius who accomplished that, because these women who, had they died under other circumstances, wouldn't have got much of a funeral. Their funerals were well attended by the people of Whitechapel. They were almost adopted by them.
Mm-hmm.
So it certainly cast a light on Whitechapel and what was going on there, and it did bring some help. Not a lot, but some.
Mm-hmm.
And things, as we know, they've changed quite a bit from then to now.
Oh, for sure.
But so it just, like, Oscar, that would be like Tom Cruise commenting on a murder today. You know,
Right.
it's that kind of big. And I think that adds to the mystique, is like so many people who were famous then had something to say. I mean, Arthur Conan Doyle tried to apply Sherlock Holmes' method to solve the Ripper case.
Uh-huh.
He was never successful, but he tried.
Right.
Chris, any final thoughts you want to share?
Our Chris is tired.
I can tell. Well, that's our show. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Bill Barrett, who does our theme music. That last name is spelled Behrendt. Thank you, Bill. If you need music for a project, Bill's your guy. You can reach him at Bill Barron at sbcglobal.net. He also does performances like live music. So if you need like a wedding or some other kind of, Bill's your guy. Thanks to Paige Elmore of the Reverie Crime podcast, who has a Canva addiction that she's combined with our Krysta's artwork to do some logo art for us. Thank you, Paige.
Thank you, Paige.
Thanks to Aaron Gnurk of the Big Dumb Fun Show, who continues to promote us locally. Join us next week for more family plot fun. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.